Welcome back to Literally First Class. I'm so excited that you're here. So, today we're going to dive into a little bit of a different topic, but I'm talking all about what the healing and mental health space gets wrong. Yep, you heard me. What they get wrong. So, first things first, I love personal development. I love somatic work. I deeply believe in our ability to self heal and actually rewire. I love Dr. Joe Dispenza's body of work and his story. I actually haven't been to any of his retreats, but I love what he stands for. I love the idea that we can have holistic healing. I love that we are really tuning in more to this vessel and the body leading the way. I love that we're becoming more aware and awake about things, but I think there's still a big opportunity for growth in this space. In that some of these things only go so far, but some of these things can also be kind of cloaked in healing and rewiring or trauma work, but actually aren't. And so I want to share with you a few things, like what I think they get wrong, but also how you can do your due diligence and your homework to understand um, kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing, if you will. And this is really kind of a hot button for me because I get really frustrated when I see people online talking about somatic work and they're not fucking trained in it. Or people that, because what happens is people come to me with a huge, like, just lack of trust in general of products and programs and offers that they're going to invest in for their next level of leadership enhancement, executive coaching, money making strategies, business development, trauma healing, all of that stuff is what women come to me for. And they're like, "It's so hard to tell." And I already, don't fully trust myself to make a decision based on either being burned or what people say they're about, but then you, like, find out that they don't have any of the credentials or any of the training, and they're like, "It sounded great, but it actually wasn't a great experience." There could be people that are actually trained, and have all the credentials and all of the proper things, but maybe they still just aren't a vibe for you, and that's okay. Right? That's okay. I'm not the coach for everybody. Just like when I used to teach spin class, I used to tell people I may not be the instructor for you. I was a bit of a tough ass, admittedly. I was like from the Jillian Michaels training boot camp days. And so that was kind of my style of teaching. I've evolved and grown since then. So my style's a little different with coaching now, but you might have all the right credentials and it still might be a mismatch. So I just want to help you make more educated decisions as far as like what somatic work is and how to pick a somatic practitioner or work with somebody that says that they do this work and kind of walk you through a little bit of that, as well as like where I think the opportunity for growth is with the mental health space and healing. So the first thing is, and this might be surprising to some of you, or maybe you've heard me say this before, but cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy doesn't actually create transformation. I don't know if that's shocking for you, but it's shocking for the therapists that do this kind of work because they're the ones that end up being in the somatic training with me, side by side. They're in the cohort as we have gone through this 3-year program. And they're like, oh my God, how have we never been taught somatic work? Like we've only had a piece of the puzzle. Like somatic work, most people will tell you is like learning this piece that you didn't know was missing, but now you have the key to. And so, talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, just it only goes so far. And after a certain point, it becomes mental masturbation. I think it serves a purpose when we are maybe presencing and saying things for the first time that we've never said out loud before. It can heal shame because shame, according to Brene Brown, and I love this quote, it needs secrecy, silence, and judgment to survive. And so if we're sharing, well, and in the presence of an empathetic witness, then wow, that's super healing just by taking that step to presence it, especially for the first time. So there is healing, but then you get to a certain point and you're like, well, fuck, I'm aware of what I'm aware of, but why is nothing changing? Like, I know I do this pattern. I am seeing it play out, but I'm still not seeing any actual change in reaction. I'm not actually seeing the rewiring work take root. And that's because they actually don't rewire anything, right? Because they only operate at the 10%, which means what you're already aware of. And that's why I say it's like mental masturbation. Somatic work is bottom up processing. It's in the sensations of the nervous system that actually literally has a language of its own. And people liken learning and experiencing somatic work as if they were learning Italian or French. It's literally like learning a new language. And um, we only we can only be aware of so much, right? So that 90% is key because it's like where you find your foot on the gas pedal that you didn't know it was pressing on, or the brake pad, depending on how you typically, handle things in your nervous system. So that's why that work is so important. And, the other thing is that CBT or talk therapy, traditional therapy can be a means to start to avoid feelings where we intellectualize the healing, right? And I'll get to a little bit more about that later, but it might feel really good to verbally process, but it's actually a deep subconscious avoidant pattern to feel feelings, to feel sensations in the body simply because it doesn't feel safe. Again, unconsciously. So awareness is just information without integration. And the way that we learn to start to transform and to rewire and to access, right, that key of the 90% under the hood is with somatic work. I would also say, even though I'm not EMDR trained, there are clients I've heard that have had some experience with that have found it to be very helpful. And I would say that's probably the most similar to somatic work, except we're not just doing visualization. That's only one channel, if you will, of somatic access points and rewiring. Overly pathologizing everything. Number two, where now we've got this language about trauma and somatics and the nervous system, and it's become this intellectually sharp, surgical tool that we are, beating people with the tongue of this. And the reason I say it in that way is because it's a way that we're still intellectualizing the work, but now we've got fancier, more educated language around it, and now everything becomes a problem and it's overly pathologized. So it's like, "Oh, do you, say yes when you mean no? Well, then you must 100% be a people pleaser." Or if someone challenges your viewpoint, suddenly they're a narcissist and they're gaslighting you. And it's like we're so quick to pathologize because we want the answer as to why this is happening, and then we wanna fix it because it's uncomfortable to what? Feel and be with. So, healing, and I say this to my clients, healing is so much less about trying to get rid of and purify, and so much more about allowing all of. And when you realize that, you realize it's all fucking spiritual. It's all spiritual, which is really cool. And that permission ends up being the portal to healing instead. One example I can give you, and if you wanna tune into this replay, is a client that I interviewed. Her name is Becky Clark. She's in the UK. She's amazing. She has, like, several companies, one of which is a very successful brick-and-mortar foot clinic. And, she came to me wanting to, go into coaching and launch this additional sector of wellness, but just a different vehicle. And she was doing, like, food work and, work around that. She came to me and she shares all this in this, client interview. I got to interview her, and she shares exactly what her takeaways were with somatic work and how this helped her and, like, how this has helped catapult her into, like, she's just on fire right now, into, like, a whole new revenue stream. It's really, really cool. So if you want that replay, just DM me replay on Instagram at I am Keri Ford, and I'll make sure that you get that. But we talked a lot about all of the things that she felt like she was making herself wrong for, and then we did rewiring work around it. And so one of the things was that she talks about openly was that she felt very twitchy and like, "Oh, there she goes again, like squirrely Becky," and how this really held her back because it made her feel deep shame for showing up, and it really held her back from her power and owning her voice and owning her spotlight and like being front and center, which she felt like she was really created to do in this way. But just she was like, it's so weird. I can't do it. I can do it in my foot clinic. I can do it in other places, but I'm not fully doing it in the way I really want to in this other realm. And so we got really curious about that. And so I was like, what if you just allow yourself to shake more, to twitch more? And she realized, like, in this big, powerful moment, how much healing was just about allowing all of. And so, thus, by allowing herself to twitch more and be squirrely Becky, the less the shame had control over her and made her want to run away and hide. And so it allowed her to just show the fuck up and own herself. And then by way of doing that, it actually diffused the twitchiness. And I want to share a story about cake and why this is parallel to this. So back when I was doing food coaching, intuitive eating coaching, there's a book that maybe Maybe you know, maybe you don't. It's called Intuitive Eating. And this book changed my life. I have shared that time and again. I was in the throes of an eating disorder in college. I was anorexic. I didn't eat. I was, I was like binge exercising, if you will. I was obsessed with calories. I could still tell you to this day how many calories are in 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. I knew the label, like literally the label of things I was eating. And my goal was to eat as little as possible, sometimes just 50 calories a day. It would be like a piece of Weight Watchers toast, which was like 25 calories, and like an apple, which was like 40 to 55, depending on how big it is. And that would be my whole day. And then I was taking diet pills and I was like overly exercising and I was just obsessed. And I was in this like dark hole. And I picked up the book Intuitive Eating actually as a way to fuel my eating disorder and keep myself in this like fear-based thing, but I noticed it had some language about eating disorders on it. What I didn't know is that it was actually more of a recovery book. So like God found me in that Barnes& and Noble in New York City and was like, "This book is the book I want you to read." And I first started reading it and I got really angry because I was like, "What the fuck is this book? It's like eat whatever you want and then you won't want it anymore." And I'm like, what? That makes 0 sense. But this came from the space of not trusting myself. Like, if you've ever struggled with any kind of undereating or overeating, binge eating, deprivation cycles, anything like that, disordered eating, however it looks for you, you know that you probably don't trust yourself in a room with said item. Maybe it's donuts, maybe it's something else. So for a while, I had this weird thing with Nutri-Grain bars and bagels. And I used to eat Nutri-Grain bars with 0 guilt in 8th grade. It was like my morning snack. And that moment came up for me because that felt like food wasn't a thing then. Like food just wasn't an issue. I didn't think about what was in a Nutri-Grain. I just ate it. And part of my healing was allowing myself to eat Nutri-Grain bars. And it sounds so silly, but I had to put it into practice. And I had to remember that the healing, and this is before personal development, but I had to remember that healing occurs where permission is the portal. And so, thus, in allowing myself to then eat Nutri-Grain bars as I was healing from this eating disorder, as I chose to lean into this process, I actually didn't even want the Nutri-Grain bar anymore, the Nutri-Grain bar anymore, because I was like, I don't even like this. It tastes like wax. It's not even good. I don't know why I made this such a big deal, but it was because I told myself I couldn't have it. And so shame acts the same way in that if you make yourself wrong for maybe even natural, very wise, very loving adaptations that your nervous system has created as a means to survive, well, then it becomes the thing that you need to avoid. It becomes the thing that starts to have control over you. Gabor Mate talks about how this is where addiction is born. It's in the avoidance of wanting to feel these feelings, not in the addiction itself. And so, if permission is the portal to healing, what do you need to allow more of rather than pathologize and make yourself wrong for? And I think that that's a really important distinction as you heal. And I'll say you probably need to be in your healing gradient, as I call it, instead of your healing journey. I think you need to be a certain amount deep in terms of probably time and experience to arrive there, because we know that when we are healing and choosing into this journey, or maybe it's kind of like, you've been forced into it in some ways with hardship and pain, but there is the deconstruction phase where it's like your life's falling apart and you start questioning everything, your belief systems, your identity, and you're like, I'm willing to like dive in here, and you get hungry for healing. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum, right? And you go to the other end of that extreme, and it's like maybe nothing is really, there are no rules, there are no like, right? So you go into this overcompensating strategy, and then you find your recalibration center. But that can only happen after a certain amount of healing has occurred, and there is this gradient that you're exploring where you kind of go all the way and then come back and arrive somewhere that feels calibrated for you. So it's probably its own podcast episode, let's be honest, but that is paradoxical mastery lived out loud. And I think it's really important that we don't overly pathologize everything, because then it just perpetuates the shame. It just perpetuates us already feeling broken and wrong for existing. And quite honestly, that's not going to be very supportive or nourishing for you as you try to heal, truly heal. Number 3, achieving the healing, measuring it only by tangible ROIs. right? Anyone else guilty of this where you're like, but I just want to understand the exact moment of trauma. I need to know like T0, as we call it. Like what happened exactly and why is this here? We may never know. I've told clients this. We may never know the moment of T0, the moment of inception of trauma. Like we may never know the story, the characters, the moment, but we can work around the leaves of the bush till we get to the root. And we can do that through sensations. And guess what's really cool about somatic work? You don't have to fucking relive it. We can work with a tiny piece of story and context and then go into the unconscious realm of the access point in the nervous system, which is just the sensations and feelings. We don't even need to know a ton about the story. So you don't have to relive it, which again brings me back to point number 1. Talk therapy can actually be re-traumatizing versus healing. If we find ourselves in like wanting to achieve the healing, or maybe you're not sure if you're trying to achieve the healing, here's how you'll know. You're trying to put a timeline on it. I need to be healed by this date, or I need to have this coaching container or this coach produce this result for me by X time. I'm going to think about the feelings like I think I feel, or if I can understand the feelings or like why they're there or like where this came from, then maybe I will be healed and just psychoanalyzing everything. So those are a couple symptoms I would say uh, if you happen to be in this realm, especially the deadline one. And it's always my high achievers that do this, which is basically all my clients, right? Because they're growth driven, they want to be the best, they're committed to being 1% better every day. And then they're putting this crazy timeline and pressure on themselves when I'm like, that's the opposite of what healing requires. Healing requires in the nervous system going at the pace of your nervous system, which is different than her nervous system and her nervous system and her nervous system, because we all have a different lived experience. And therefore, we all have a different way that this has imprinted on our nervous system and shown up in our behaviors and our patterns and the way that we make sense of our current reality. So yeah, that's a challenging one because it's a different avoidance strategy, right? It's a different way of dealing with that. And to avoid pathologizing avoidance, I want to say that that is so loving and so wise of your nervous system to have an adaptive strategy to create distance from feeling things because you probably had to. You probably had to do that. The last one, spiritual bypassing. I had a mentor that once told me the more spiritual garb someone is wearing, the more likely they are avoiding the healing because they're dressed in it and they're even saying all the right things, right? They're even saying all the right words and they are probably the ones that are avoiding the work the most. Sometimes, not always, right? All of these come with like a caveat and an asterisk. Um, but, overly using psychedelics, which looks like under the guise of healing, but it's actually escapism. Even achieving the healing and going through collecting all these certifications and healing and education, it becomes a way to intellectualize the healing or to create a one up on other people so that, we can be like, I'm more healed than you. You ever meet somebody like that? And like, well, she's just so asleep and they're so unconscious. And it's like, who are we to be the judge of how asleep or unconscious somebody is? Like, based on what? Right? Noticing the inner judger. So, spiritual bypassing can be a sneaky one because it can be going through all of the quote unquote right steps. But we're not actually maybe reaching, the deeper levels. And, part of my work in that was I had a great deal of my perfectionist mask that needed to be kind of unwound through this work. And it probably wasn't until 2022 when I decided to go through a social experiment and give up makeup for a month that I accepted the unbecoming. I had done other like guttural deep healing, but I think up until that moment, I hadn't really faced my shadow and allowed that to be perfect. And it was coming out of that where the healing occurred the most because I realized, okay, I actually really love makeup and it's all fucking spiritual. How cool is that? So, um, I hope that these are helpful and I want to bring this now into how you can see if someone is trained in any type of modality that might be of service to you. So first things first, Trauma informed is not the same as trauma trained. Trauma informed, that scope of work allows somebody to basically say, I am informed that you have trauma. I see that you have trauma. I hear that you have trauma, but they are not trained to actually rewire it. In fact, I would say they should not moving through or talking about your trauma to you. That's kind of as far as it can go. When you're trauma trained, you have been trained by a professional, um, nationally, internationally, maybe accredited. And I say maybe accredited because I think it depends on the type of school of thought, program, mentor, doctor, licensed practitioner, etc. That has worked with people, I think, in volumes. And I think volumes is important because there are so many nervous systems that just have totally different um, imprints and totally different ways in which they respond to things. And one school I really love is, Dr. Peter Levine is one of my mentors, and he has I want to say it's the Trauma Healing Institute.org now, but it's the Somatic Experiencing Institute is what it used to be called. And so when you go through that, it's a 3-year program. It is very thoughtfully curated. It is a very conscious container. Um, it has a specific pace, a specific cadence, and a specific school of thought that they actually train you to renegotiate, rewire trauma inside someone's nervous system and to do it in a very thoughtful, um, beautiful way that doesn't re-traumatize somebody, which is very, very, very important. When I see somebody saying that they do somatic breath work or they do somatic yoga. This is not always the case, but chances are more often than not, they're using it as a marketing buzzword. And the reason I know that is because it's like calling an apple gluten free. An apple is inherently gluten free, it has never had gluten in it. But gluten free in marketing has, become the thing that people are looking for. So when you see a sticker, it says gluten free, it's like, oh, great, I can eat this. It's in my plan. Yeah, that's kind of the same thing. So just be mindful of, when you say somatic, what do you mean? What are you trained in? Who have you trained with? How long have you been trained in this? I've gone on to have, just to share some of my credentials, I have continued education that dates all the way back to 2008. First and formally trained by the American Council on Exercise as a personal fitness trainer, then as a certified nutritionist, then as a behavior change specialist, then as a lifestyle weight management coach. Then I went on and did, my friend Will Reason runs a program called Trauma and Somatics, which is a 12-week course. And that's to become trauma informed, not trauma trained. But you will learn a great deal about somatic work. It's kind of like a somatics 101, but it's definitely a facilitator program to help lovingly guide and educate clients with nervous system work, which is a great starting point if you want to, catapult into deeper, more precision and mastery beyond that. It's a great starting point for the Somatic Experiencing Institute with Peter Levine. And I'm sure there's some other schools, but those are the ones that I've done. They have specific structures, a specific protocol. They have like tiers of schools like underneath everything. Like for example, with somatic experiencing, the assistants that are trained to run the current cohorts, they have gone through all the training that I went through, and then they train right the people that are coming up and coming, and so it just continues to kind of ripple out, which is really cool. Um, and you see some of these people like really thriving in business, but also creating, not just success on paper, but a movement and a way that they apply somatic work from a formerly trained background into places I think we really need it. So a great example of this is Diane Poole Heller. She went through the same program that I have continued to go through, and she's gone on to write books, The Power of Attachment, and she's an attachment theory expert. She even does continued education and workshops through somatic experiencing. So look for people that have had formal training, that have been in this for years. And I don't mean that they've they're all self-taught and that they've, led their own plant ceremony things and that, they've been to Egypt and they've done one healing thing. And it's like those are really cool, but, like, show me some of the formal training that shows that you're a safe person to work with, that has done formal processes to have the education that you have. And, admittedly, I think that, there was probably past programs that I ran that got deep fast, and I was like, "I don't know what to do here, like, what's the next thing?" And I just thank God I found somatic work and this training because my goal in joining this program and learning this work was precision and mastery. And that's exactly, you know, what we do with our program. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. I think that there are, again, like I said, asterisks and caveats to everything that I just brought up. Not there isn't a blanket statement that applies to everything, but you can be more educated when you select a trauma trained practitioner or a trauma informed coach, um, or you are reevaluating your healing path and you're like, listen, I've done everything. Because a lot of women come to me and they're like, I'm not growth adverse. Like, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to rewire, but I just feel like I've done everything. Or I feel like I've, invested time and money into something else and it just, like it hasn't really worked for me. Be willing to do something different, do your homework, and maybe it's time to reevaluate the therapy that you've been doing, which can get you only so far until you bring in the somatic piece. And I know that because the people that train with me in the somatic work are the therapists, are the, psychologists and the social workers that are like, why haven't we learned this? This is insane. So they are literally saying, somatic work is the missing piece. Um, and some of them go on to become my clients, which is really cool. So anyway, somatic work is amazing. This is less about trying to sell somatic work, if you will, and more about educating you on what it is, because I constantly have to put myths to bed. All right, I'll see you on the next episode. I have done enough talking for today. I'll see you next time.